This video is brought to you by Mubi, a curated streaming service showing exceptional films from around the globe. Get a whole month free at mubi.com/SpikimaMovies. This is the very first shot of The Killing of a Sacred Deer, a 2017 film directed by Yorgos Lanthimos. This 2-minute opening sequence is what gives away the entire plot of the film as well as its main theme, and what made me realize that there is a good reason why his films are so f***ing weird. One of the most fascinating things about the films of Yorgos Lanthimos is that they all feel synthetic. They adapt a certain strategy, whether it be for the characters, the setting, or even the cinematography, to make everything on screen unnatural and artificial. This baseline quality is what initially sets the discomforting tone Lanthimos films are known for, but it also plays a role in effectively communicating important ideas to the audience without the use of exposition.
Do you actually believe another day will make a difference? Have you seen how ugly you are?
For instance, the characters of the Lanthimos universe live and interact with their surroundings in an overly candid manner. They speak their minds and act out their urges without any hesitation and with a stilted mannerism that lessens their human-like quality.
Okay, you do have more hair than I do, but not 3 times more. Me and my mom thought it'd be nice if you came by for dinner tonight.
This is because their main purpose lies in bringing innocence and honesty to everything on screen, facilitating contextual clarity by eradicating alternative motives. Since a big part of what defines Lanthimos films is their ambiguous story, this simplicity brings balance to the otherwise complex world and prevents the audience from unnecessarily wasting energy. In The Killing of a Sacred Deer, this character trait is used to initially establish Dr. Stephen Murphy, the main protagonist of the film, as a godlike figure around his friends and family. He dictates what others must do and states personal opinions as objective truth.
Bob, you promised me you'd get a haircut, and you still haven't done it.
I'll get a haircut.
Tomorrow.
You should go soon.
Yeah, it's early.
He's got surgery in the morning. He needs to get some sleep.
It's still early.
We've got surgery in the morning.
Fine, okay.
The harsh personality is rather easily accepted and even supported by others, solidifying his status and preparing the film for the big showdown that will happen between him and Martin, a mysterious young boy whose father was killed during surgery by Stephen, who performed the task drunk.
Had you been drinking when you operated on his father?
Only a little. That had nothing to do with the outcome. A surgeon never kills a patient. An anesthesiologist can kill a patient, but a surgeon never can.
The instinctive and almost artificial demeanor of the characters reflects the world of the story itself, a world of order where everything is prearranged and controlled. Therefore, everyone, including Stephen, implicates the existence of an unstated set of rules through their actions, moving methodically and as a group. Subsequently, the individualistic traits of the characters are eliminated, turning the story they tell into an objective tale of human existence instead of a personal one. The characters are accepting and supporting Stephen's unsensible authority only because the film stays consistent with its own rules. And because the sincerity of the characters are maintained through this strict system, the rational setup doesn't stick out and the audience is led to buy the premise. The same thing applies for the spaces that envelop the characters. As if displaying the inner state of the characters themselves, the locations often lack intimacy and authenticity, characterized by bland and minimal decorations in a large empty space. The sterile environment visually engulfs the people within, mystifying the setting and further dehumanizing the characters. Even when the rooms are smaller in scale and warmer in color, they still feel fabricated and abstract, thanks to the film's unique camera work. The camera work is what gives Yorgos Lanthimos films their distinct color. It's what ascertains the vague sense of doom by commanding the flow of the film world and weakening the control the characters have over their own lives. For the mentioned establishing shots, they exclusively use wider lenses to expand the space to a point of visual distortion, intensifying the hollowness of the locations. Notice how many of these shots also maintain a very high angle, often employed to better capture the scene that contains a lot of visual information. In this case, however, the lack of visual detail ends up accenting the desertedness, provoking fear and discomfort. Basically, they are imposing the scene instead of informing it. High-angle shots are also capable of building tension, irrespective of the setting when targeted against a person. Since they make the subject look smaller and more exposed, they induce anxiety in the shots and insinuate vulnerability. For this reason, many of the ghost-like tracking shots also have the camera at a higher angle, specifically for Stephen, the most scrutinized figure of this tragedy. Indeed, a big part of including wide and tall shots is in designing a world that is governed by a higher power, a constant reminder of our insignificance and lack of control.
Most important thing in life is to have good friends, not lots of friends. That's what my dad used to say.
Low-angle shots, on the other hand, are primarily used to covertly hint at the superiority of certain characters, namely Martin, but to a certain degree, Stephen as well. One thing to note about low-angle shots is that they are able to produce opposing emotional effects when paired with other cinematic tricks. For example, you can combine low-angle shots with extreme close-ups, Dutch angle, or directional movements to generate nervousness, changing the power shot into a defensive one, stating the character's turmoil and instability.
Good boy.
In The Killing of a Sacred Deer, Stephen and Martin emit different types of power. Stephen, in spite of his composure, demands his authority, while Martin exhibits it. Depending on the adjacent scenes, the context, and the framing, the similar low-angle shots of Stephen and Martin constantly shift between dominance and inferiority. Many times, this difference keeps Martin in charge and redraws Stephen as someone who is more dogmatic than omniscient, with his subsequent assertions only disclosing his weakness. Now, there's one specific technique used in The Killing of a Sacred Deer that exceptionally captures this dynamic. By far my favorite aspect of the film, and one that was shown in the beginning of this video, the zooms. Zooms are an inherently interesting technique because at first glance they are no different from dolly shots that physically move into and away from a subject. But in reality, the two are completely different. The dolly ins have a lot to do with connection. They tend to place the audience and the subject in the same space, creating intimacy and presence, while moving the world around the target for an effective emotional linkage. Zoom-ins, on the other hand, have little to do with connection and a lot to do with fixation. It compresses the world in on the target since its surroundings stay in proportion and confines the audience with the image. It's a more claustrophobic and anxious shot than a dolly, and a much more fitting technique for the tone of the Lanthimos universe. The zooms are everywhere in The Killing of a Sacred Deer. Just quickly skimming through the film reveals that there are significantly more zooms than any other visible techniques. To put things into perspective, there are around 20 signature ghost tracking shots, 30 wide establishing shots, and 25 low-angle and 10 high-angle shots that can be considered relevant to the hidden themes of the film. The zooms, there are over 60, including the opening and the climax. Then the question is, how? How exactly are the zooms foreshadowing the film in this scene? First is the zoom out, which can change the context of the subject by revealing its hidden surroundings. Here, the scene begins by highlighting the vitality and strength of the heart, only to unveil that it is on the brink of death, entirely dependent on the hands of the surgeon. Obviously, there are many possible interpretations of the zoom out, but given the opening scene, my preferred take is to regard it as a symbol for vulnerability and struggle. Fittingly, the zoom in, which centralizes the discarded gloves, speaks of the absolute authority, the almighty hand of the god that the desperately beating heart is depending on for mercy. This hand, of course, is of Dr. Stephen Murphy. The contrast between the human heart and the garbage can generates an intriguing tension, unconsciously degrading the worth of human life and forcing this divine intervention upon it. Stephen being both the godlike figure of his environment and the one responsible for the demise of Martin's father, ultimately becomes the victim of this intervention, and the zooms in this scene are merely foreshadowing his tragic fate. Then the next question is, do the zooms translate for the rest of the film? The answer is yes, but with a twist. Going back a step, this is why most of the low-angle shots involving Martin also have the camera zooming in on him, to unmistakably state that he is the glove of the story, the one in true control, and therefore the one above Stephen. But as it is with all things, we can't just associate one technique with one meaning, since there are lots of variables to consider when analyzing a given scene. For instance, many of the low-angle shots have nothing to do with power dynamics. Instead, they are inserted solely to transform the scene into something more unconventional, unstable, and awkward. Even when they are used as a power shot, like in this scene, the angle ends up reflecting the physical state of Martin more so than his state of mind. If anything, this scene is more about Stephen's anger and violence than Martin's objective position. In fact, this contrast can even be regarded as a visual twist that juxtaposes our expectations with the unmatching shot angles, a trick often seen in Kubrick films where the one in charge is shot from above and the one at a disadvantage is shot from below.
If you're gonna do something, you better be fast. The boy's about to die.
In this scene, the camera zooms into Anna standing in front of a mirror. A normal application of our theory would view Anna suddenly as a godlike figure, but that makes no sense. This is why we must consider the adjacent scene. Indeed, rewinding the film a bit reveals that Anna has just returned from meeting Martin for the first time. The zoom in, therefore, should be viewed as an extension of Martin's influence than it is an objective display of Anna's rank. Going a step further, a scene that follows has Anna step away from the camera with Stephen in her place, receiving a phone call from Martin. Now the zoom feels even less like it was intended for a specific person, but as an indication of what was to come, Martin's expanding influence, represented as the phone call.
My mom will be delighted to see you. She hasn't seen you in 2 years, not since the hospital.
There are countless other fascinating examples of zooms and other camera tricks that subtly expose the character's inner state and relationship with each other, ranging from the obvious zoom in for Martin, the repeated zoom outs for Kim, tracking shots for Stephen, all the way to the slow zoom in through frame spaces for stalking effect. Despite the exceptions and complicated procedures for interpreting the various techniques, the reason why we can confidently identify low angles with dominance, high angles with vulnerability, zoom-ins with divinity, and zoom-outs with struggle is because the most decisive moments of the film always argue for these correlations.
My husband told me about you and your father.
Oh, he did? Did he also tell you about my mom?
This 2-minute zoom-in sequence of Martin delivering a symbolic statement about justice while eating spaghetti is one such example. This scene is arguably one of the most significant turning points of this film. It's the moment Martin takes complete control and begins to strike down on Stephen's family, and the long gradual zoom-in is what puts the final nail in the coffin. To better drive the point home, the short close-up insertions of Anna switch from low to high angle, visually communicating her acknowledgement of Martin's authority by the end of the conversation, which eventually persuades the audience to do the same.
I don't know if what is happening is fair, but it's the only thing I can think of as close to justice.
Accordingly, the last act of the film fills itself with transitioning shots that zoom out of Stephen and his family crying, persuading, explaining, and struggling, like the beating heart. It sends a tragic message that no matter what they do, there is only one available option, one predestined outcome that is under Martin's total control. Yorgos Lanthimos isn't my favorite director by any means, but I do think he is one of the most misunderstood directors out there. He doesn't make things bizarre for no reason. He uses his peculiar cinematic universe merely as a vehicle for philosophical explorations, urging the audience to question and doubt the meaning of human existence, dilemmas, conditions, and tragedy. The absurdities of the film world exist to lessen the weight of the topics at hand, allowing the viewers to examine the various propositions in a more whimsical and original angle. This is why some of his most intense sequences come off as being equally ridiculous, because colliding antagonistic concepts with each other tremendously helps in making a statement, in questioning, mocking, or making things more accessible for the viewers. Every tactic that is implemented in his films and every choice made for his characters and setting all point to the idea of exploration, not assertion.
You do realize, Stephen, we're in this situation because of you.
What else do you want me to do?
Something to put an end to all of this. That's what I want. Can you do that?
The presented weirdness and unfairness are all part of human existence and are more realistic than one gives credit for. In this sense, perhaps his films are genuinely meant to be comedic as much as it is tragic, just like our own lives.
You caused this tragic thing to happen. I don't understand why I should have to pay the price. Why my children should have to pay the price.
Narrative, symbolic, and thematic purposes aside, the zooms are one method of sparking a conversation in the killing of a sacred deer.
Clean slate. Don't you get it?
As we've seen, wherever there is a zoom, there is Martin. And wherever Martin is where Lanthimos resides, watching the audience, whispering into our ears, and asking us, are you ready to kill your own sacred deer?
Have a good day.
I recently got inspired to make this video on Yorgos Lanthimos thanks to one of my favorite films by a legendary Iranian filmmaker Abbas Kiarostami called Taste of Cherry, which I got to rewatch on Mubi, the sponsor for today's video. Mubi is an online curated cinema streaming service that premieres a new film every day, and since every film is handpicked, it's a great way to watch films you love and discover new films you haven't seen before. As I mentioned, a number of films by Kiarostami as well as a short film by Lanthimos himself called Mimic are available to watch on Mubi right now if you're in Canada like I am. As I said, Taste of Cherry is what got me to make this video. It's a beautiful film that makes great use of different camera tricks to provoke a sense of distance and loneliness. I highly recommend you check it out if you want to learn more about camera movements and angles. In fact, you can sign up for an extended 30-day free trial with my link today at mubi.com/SpikimaMovies. That's mubi.com/SpikimaMovies. So go check it out, and thanks for watching.